go. You see it, right?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Here we go. But I need to, before you see this one, if I keep
Oh, that's
it.
nice. You could see
Yeah.
both windows.
Yep. So here we go. And let us start, inshallah. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I still need to. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So we have here 200 hadith. They're pretty random, but at the same time, they are one short hadith. They relate to various topics. I would say they're probably the most important hadith and most frequently, I would say, reported hadiths, reported at least in mentioned by a lot of the khutaba, by, of course, I would say by a lot of those that would give durus. So I would definitely want to go over those hadith. I loved how they had done this compilation because it's a good compilation relating to various topics. It makes things easy for us to remember. So let's go over these 200 hadith. What I'm going to do, I'm not necessarily going to use this translation because I'm not always happy with this translation. I love doing my own translation because it basically gives me the time, gives me and allows me to kind of go over the wordings and probably comment on something. So let's challenge ourselves and see if we really can go over these 200 ahadith, and hopefully, inshallah, we would cover all of them. So let's do it. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the first hadith عن عمر بن الخطاب قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كانت هجرته لدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة يتزوجها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. The Prophet ﷺ had said that all the actions are dependent on the intention. And every single person is going to be judged based on the intentions that they had. So whoever would migrate and whoever has the intention to migrate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, then the reward is going to be based on that. Whoever migrates for some cause that they want in this life, or perhaps a woman to get married to, then whatever they had intended to migrate for is basically what is going to determine their migration, in other words, their hijrah. Now, you want to keep in mind, there was a story about this hadith, so we did go over the story, we did talk about this hadith. I'm not going to continue and repeat what we had said before. Let's see. من صلى علي صلاة واحدة من صلى علي صلاة واحدة صلى الله عليه عشرة. That let's see the translation. Whoever prays for me once, God will pray for him 10 times. I like that translation. Whoever prays. So what does it mean to pray on the Prophet ﷺ? It's to pray for the Prophet ﷺ. So we're speaking about saying Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So Salatillah, it's basically making the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forgive him. To say the salah that you would make was you're basically asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the Prophet ﷺ in order for you to be included in, of course, the shafa'ah, which is the intercession. Okay, that's going to be on Judgment Day. So you would get in return 10 times. In other words, you would get 10 times of the same dua for you as well, and you would get basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving you forgiveness, inshallah, 10 times. So we're speaking about here as a barakah. Let's look at this hadith. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. This hadith is actually mutawatir. What does a mutawatir mean? So mutawatir actually means that it was narrated by a group of Sahaba that passed it on to a group of Tabi'een. In other words, this is one of the most highly authentic ahadith. And I want you to look at all these ahadith that we are doing are either narrated by Muslim or they're narrated by Bukhari. So all of these ahadith are authentic. Okay, so especially the first hadith, this is mutawatir, and so is this one. Let's see, من كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. Whoever deliberately and intentionally makes a lie about the Prophet ﷺ, then let them ensure that they will have a seat in hellfire. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Let's continue with the other hadith. كل أمتي عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال كل أمتي يدخلون الجنة إلا من أبى. قالوا يا رسول الله ومن يأبى؟ قال من أطاعني دخل الجنة ومن عصاني فقد أبى. Let's see. That the Prophet ﷺ said, all my nation will be entering, and everyone in my nation will be entering Jannah except those who refuse to enter Jannah. They said, O Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who will refuse? He says, whoever obeys me will enter Jannah, and whoever disobeys me is basically the one that had refused to come along. Now, scholars then went in details with, well, what does it mean to obey, or to basically obey the Prophet ﷺ? Are we here talking about obedience in terms of whatever Islam had considered as lawful and prohibited, or is this also talking about things that relate to sunnah as things that relate to bid'ah or not, and innovation or not? In general, we could see that this hadith was not specifying anything in particular, leaving it man ata'ani to mean whoever obeys the Prophet ﷺ, meaning obeys the principles that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed onto the Prophet ﷺ, whether we're speaking about in the Quran or whether we're speaking about in the Sunnah. Let's look at this hadith. عن أنس بن مالك الأنصاري رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من رغب عن سنتي فليس مني. Let's see how it's translated. Whoever turns away from my sunnah. What does it mean, my sunnah? So my sunnah, you want to keep in mind that there are different things that the Prophet ﷺ had taught. So when we're speaking about the word sunnah, that generally means a path. And of course, in demonstration, we're speaking about the words that the Prophet ﷺ had reported, the actions that the Prophet ﷺ had done, and certainly the different reports, we're going to move out. Oh, no, I can't. So من رغب عن سنتي فليس مني. So when we're speaking about من رغب, and this would be inclusive. So anybody that, of course, you look at the word رغب, this isn't necessarily only turns away, but also has some kind of, I guess, pleasure, some kind of amusement to turn away away from the Prophet ﷺ's path, then that person is not part, فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي actually means is not part of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning not part of Islam. Not part of Islam. So when you look at فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي, that's the same thing. مَنْ غَشَّنَا فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا. Whoever would cheat on anybody within the Muslim Ummah is not considered as part of us. This is in order to say that they're excluded from being part of Islam or from being part of the Ummah. All right, let's look at this one once again. So are we talking about an innovation here? Or are we talking about the different obligations as well? It is including all. It's including whatever the Prophet ﷺ had taught in principle, and it would also include whatever the Prophet ﷺ had taught in the way a practice is done. That's why Ibn Taymiyyah had said, no action is going to be considered unless it contained two things. Number one, unless it was following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless it was basically following the regulations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless it was coming from the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and two, unless it was based on the way the Prophet ﷺ had demonstrated the action and how it is to be done. So if we're speaking about certain rituals, we're looking at the Prophet ﷺ telling us, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli." Make hajj as you see me hajj. Do hajj. Make salah as you had seen me make salah. Do the wudu as you would see me making wudu, etc. So therefore, to make any other personal interpretation for Islam is basically going to be falling within this category, which is that they are not applying what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what the Prophet ﷺ had taught. Let's see. Another hadith. عن أنس رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. On the authority of Anas, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, and on the authority of the Prophet ﷺ, who said, none of you truly believes until I am more beloved to him than his father, his child, and all of mankind. We did actually talk about this hadith in detail last week, so I'm just going to, summarize what we had said. We said it's basically to let us know that the Prophet ﷺ, who resembles the legacy of wahi, the legacy of all the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent, and the Prophet ﷺ is basically the practical legacy and the practical side of wahi, versus the oral side of wahi is going to be basically Quran. So you got the oral side of wahi is the Quran, the practical side of wahi are the prophets, and certainly the Prophet ﷺ is the last prophet, so therefore he would demonstrate the practical side of wahi, and certainly our love to the Prophet is really coming from the idea that we are embracing the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent onto the Prophet himself. So when the Prophet ﷺ says, you would not be believers until I would be more beloved unto you than your own fathers, than your own children, and then all people, that actually means your center, the most important priority to you is basically the Prophet ﷺ, who demonstrates the practical wahi. So how do I become a person that loves the Prophet ﷺ more than my own father, more than my own mother, more than my own children, more than anybody in the world? There's no way that you could love the Prophet ﷺ until you would read and understand his seerah, until you understand and really know who he is, and really see that he was a person of mercy, a person of great akhlaq, a person that really resembled the wahi, the principles of Allah subhanahu subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's how you would become to love the Prophet ﷺ, and you would see that no one is compared to this magnificent person that demonstrated with him being infallible, demonstrated the practical wahi. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: أنا أغنى الشركاء عن الشرك من عمل عملا أشرك فيه معي غيري تركته وشركه. And let's see this hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this is called, when you say قال الله تعالى, and it's not a hadith, it's not a Quran, this would be called a hadith Qudusi. This would be called a hadith Qudusi. So what does that mean? Hold on. So the word Qudusi actually means divine or sacred. Okay? So when you look at قال الله تعالى, and it's not an ayah, this would be the words of the Prophet ﷺ being reported, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, but it is not literal what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had literally said. He said, أنا أغنى الشركاء عن الشرك. أنا أغنى الشركاء عن الشرك. I am the most independent of partners from having partners. Whoever does a deed and associates someone with me in it, I will leave him and his partner. So let's look at this hadith. أنا أغنى الشركاء عن الشرك, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, we cannot whatsoever associate any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, whether the actions that you do, or whether we're speaking about probably spiritual things, ritual, whatever action you would be doing, it must be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent from anyone, and therefore this cannot be done for the sake of other than the Lord himself. If anybody is to do this action to other than the Lord himself, then that person would basically not get rewarded because their ikhlas is missing. Wait a minute. So I thought ikhlas was supposed to be that a person is doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, there you go. So the word ikhlas is basically sincerity. So when we're talking about sincerity, we're talking about that you're doing it exclusively for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Two, you're doing it for Allah. You're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that you are demonstrating it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are not seeking praise, and that you are also not going to give up on the action, even if others had put you down for it. So to you, it is going to be equal whether you're getting a eulogy or whether you're getting a derogatory statement. To you, that doesn't matter, as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala approves it, as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content over the action. That's what will keep you going, because you seek the praise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's al-ikhlas. What if I don't have al-ikhlas? What if I doubt whether I would have al-ikhlas or not? You would continue the good action and don't stop it, even if you doubted your ikhlas. Insha'Allah, with time, your ikhlas will be in place. Don't stop the good action, continue. Just make sure you would work on your ikhlas, and with time, insha'Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will purify your ikhlas, and continue making the dua, and try to make it as secret and as hidden as possible to help with your ikhlas stay in place. Let's see the other hadith. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Can I ask you something? Sorry. Okay, so you know how you're supposed to keep like something, like a good deed secret?
Right.
But what if like someone in your family, they know about it? Is that still
It's still ikhlas, Noura. Ikhlas, even if you were to do this in public, even if you were to do it on public television, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean the person is not doing ikhlas, because an ikhlas is determined internally and not necessarily on whether people see it or not. Okay,
Okay,
so
Jazakallah khair.
a person can be doing something publicly and on public television, okay, and but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're lacking ikhlas, because ikhlas is to be determined on the inside. Are you really doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or are you doing it to get the praise for it? It is part of human nature, like we said yesterday, to like praise, because in early childhood, we talked about it yesterday, that in early childhood, of course, we recognize that something is approved or something is right or not, basically by an adult approving it or by other people complimenting on our action. So it becomes built in with our own mind that if it is complimented by mom and dad or by others, that means that's the right behavior. Okay. And as you mature, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then once you become a person that had reached the age of puberty, right now your brain to a certain level had matured to recognize that what makes something approved or what makes something worthy of compliment is not necessarily another person's compliment, but is a compliment by the Lord Himself. So you start maturing in your vision, you start maturing in your relationship with how and what you and how you relate with the actions and the intentions, and how you would relate with what is wider than the action. And you recognize that the consequence or the purpose for this action is farther than getting a compliment, but it's actually reaching a compliment where you're getting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being pleased over you and complimenting your action. So that's to be mature in your intention. That's to be mature in your relationship with the purpose that preceded your existence, which is Jannah, which is to basically succeed in the akhirah. So that's going to be you maturing. So when you look at this hadith, you're talking about al-ikhlas is a type of maturity. Al-ikhlas is a maturity where you recognize that people are not worthy of somehow getting their compliment, because at the end of the day, even if you had 200 million followers or whatever number you had following you, and they were all loving you and complimenting you, it doesn't really make a difference. It won't change and give you a longer life expectancy, and it certainly won't give you wealth. Well, unless if you're on social media, it might give you wealth, but it won't necessarily have any change within your happiness on the inside, because happiness on the inside is really وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى. The Lord Almighty is the one that has the control and the ability to bring happiness and to bring distress onto you. So therefore, you would relate your ikhlas to be with the one that has the ultimate power to bring any provision. Okay, let's continue. المؤمن القوي خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف وفي كل خير احرص على ما ينفعك واستعن بالله ولا تعجز وإن أصابك شيء فلا تقل لو أني فعلت كذا فعلت كان كذا وكذا، ولكن قل قدر الله وما شاء فعل. فإن لو تفتح عمل الشيطان. Let's see what happened. The Prophet ﷺ said, a strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than a weak believer. And in each there is good. Be keen on what brings good to you. Hold on and seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do not lose hope. And if something is to happen to you, then don't say, if only I had done such and such, but instead say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed, and what the Lord Almighty had decreed happens. As for the word if would open the doors to shaitan. What is that supposed to be considering? Al-mu'min al-qawi, a strong believer, is basically going to be a person that recognizes that the true power is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore a true believer that is qawi, a strong believer, is always keen on doing what will bring them a good outcome, what will bring them benefit, what would give them a good interest, basically, and helpful to their life. And a mu'min that is strong mu'min would always seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and would not necessarily hold on to their own powers and consider only their potentials, because they recognize that their potentials are human potentials and that they need to hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if something were to happen to them where something probably didn't go as expected, they would not use the word, if I had done such and such. Why not? Because if you were to use, if I had done such and such, you're always going to feel that regret, and you're going to be imprisoned by that regret and not feel that, well, let me look on how I could change this, rather than look into what I cannot change, which is in the past, but let me see what I can do in the future to change probably the calamity or the whatever that happened that was unexpected. So a believer does not continue looking back, but looks in the future to, well, what can I do to make a change? Go ahead, Noura.
Sorry. My question was, you said that there's good in both. Does that mean that everyone, even a weak believer, has the potential to become a strong believer?
So when you look at وَفِي كُلٍّ خَيْرٍ, so both a weak believer and a strong believer, there is good in both of them. Okay, so there is good in both of them, but one is better. So you can have a believer that's probably having their shortcomings and probably not being keen on what is beneficial to them. Perhaps they're having some perhaps they're having certain shortcomings. That's a mu'min that is da'if, but still there's good in them, even though they may have their shortcomings. But fi kullin khair. Fi kullin khair is basically the strong believer and the weak believer. There's both. There's khair in both, but certainly al-mu'min al-qawi is more beloved and is definitely better. So who is a mu'min that is qawi? Well, a mu'min that cares to look for what brings them benefit. A mu'min qawi is basically a one that seeks refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A mu'min that is qawi is not looking back and regretting what they had done, but they would look hopeful to what they could do to make a change. Let's look at the other hadith. The
I like that. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, al-iman bid'un wa sittuna shu'bah. والحياء شعبة من الإيمان. الإيمان بضع. There is another narration, بضع وسبعون. So what is بضع وستون and بضع وسبعون? That faith is, the word بضع is 3 to 9. So we're looking at 60 some, or is it 70 some different narrations? So you have different narrations telling us as to really how many partitions, how many branches is faith divided into. So he said, وَالْحَيَاءُ شُعْبَةٌ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ, and being shy and having that shyness. What is al-haya? Shy from what? So shy to perhaps one, commit what is haram. You're shy to commit what is haram. And could be shyness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could also be shyness even from people. You're shy that people would see that you're probably doing the wrong thing. You're probably doing the wrong behavior. That's part of al-Iman. Because إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. If you're not shy, then you're going to do whatever. So shyness, الحياء لا يأتي إلا بخير. الحياء brings good. If you're actually shy from people knowing what you're doing, well, that's one way of knowing whether this is a good thing or not. If you are shy that people would see you in that state, then you would know that that's the wrong thing to do. But of course, if we're speaking about some that would act in audacity, that means they lack Iman. It doesn't mean that they are powerful and that they are proud and that they are strong, but it actually means they have the audacity to do the wrong thing. So what determines whether something is supposed to be within the perimeter of what we're supposed to be shy from and what we're not supposed to be shy from? We're talking about shy from doing something haram, shy from doing something immodest, shy from doing something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not approve of, shy from doing something that is probably not acceptable even culturally. Even culturally, yes, even culturally, if it's not acceptable within that culture, then you have to, if it is not contradicting Islam, then you have to embrace people's choices, because you also, rahimallahu mri'an ذب الغيبة عن نفسه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shed his mercy on a person that keeps il-ghiba, or that keeps any ill talk and any wrong talk off of them, because you don't want to put you don't want to put any type of talk about you, any type of disrespectful talk in let's say gossip to happen around you. So, well, then don't put yourself in the wrong areas. Simple as that. If within that culture that is seen as disrespectful, then learn the people's culture that is in the place that you're in and respect that culture by basically abiding by it as well. So, وَالْحَيَاءُ شُعْبَةٌ مِّنَ الْإِيمَانِ, and being shy, it's part of faith. Because if you are not shy, you're going to say the wrong things, you're going to act in the wrong way, you're probably going to behave in very many different ways, because you're not shy if people would have known that, or your parents would have known that, or probably Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overseeing all of that, and that person lacks iman. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن لله 99 اسما 100 إلا واحدة من أحصاها دخل الجنة. The Prophet ﷺ said, God has 99 names, 100 minus 1. Why did the Prophet ﷺ say 99, 100 minus 1? This is an emphasis. Whoever counts them, this isn't necessarily to count, say 1, 2, 3, 4. No, this isn't necessarily to count them, because the word ahsa is to embrace. So when we're speaking about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're speaking about that you're embracing it, that you're holding on to it, meaning that your heart is delving in that faith in a strong way, that it becomes who you are. It becomes you. You believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the magnificent, therefore you become strong. You believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the healer. You recognize that his treatment is what really matters. You believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a razaq, then therefore you don't fall in anybody abusing your need. And the list goes on and on. So therefore you would become a person of izzah, you would become a person of faith, you would become a a person of strength. You would become a person of power. You would become a person of hope. You would become a person of seeking treatment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. You become an independent person. And therefore, when you look at the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're actually talking about also what actually is containing in a Muslim's heart and what makes a Muslim's vision, what makes the core of a believer, and why would that believer become a person of strength, a person of power, a person of independence, etc. It's because if this person truly contained the true meaning of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then those are the people, not only will they be strong in this life, but even they would be the ones to also guarantee that they would enter Jannah. Love this hadith. Love this hadith. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال الله عز وجل. This is another hadith قدسي. قال الله عز وجل سبقت رحمتي غضبي. اللهم ارحمنا برحمتك. سبقت رحمتي غضبي. My mercy precedes my wrath. يا ربي. My mercy precedes my wrath. What does that mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, and that you would focus and redirect your focus and just remember that yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shadidul iqab, but his mercy preceded and his mercy comes first. So a believer is always living between al-khawf and al-raja. What is al-khawf? Al-khawf is basically fear. And here, the person is living in fear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might not be content over them, and then they would live in a raja. They would live in believing and focusing on the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله يغار وغيرة الله أن يأتي المؤمن ما حرم عليه. Let's say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that إن الله يغار, God is jealous. And God's jealousy is that the believer should do, that is, if a believer were to do what he had forbidden onto him. So what does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is jealous? It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be not pleased, and certainly if a person were to transgress the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically be watching him, and at the same time would basically revenge. So when you say al-ghayra, what is al-ghayra? Al-ghayra is when you're angry at something, but then you revenge when someone took a certain space that does not belong to them. So when you're talking about, for example, a woman's jealousy, whenever she would be jealous of something, she would then probably turn away, maybe even attempt to revenge or harm or etc. So when we say inna Allah yaghar, that if a person is probably doing something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considered as a border, as a boundary that the person is not supposed to transgress, that the person is supposed to worry that they had exceeded the limit by going into a border that does not belong onto them, and expect a retaliation, a revenge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is the border? The border is أن يأتي المؤمن ما حرم عليه. It's the border is if a believer were to transgress the limit and go beyond the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted to them. In other words, they went into an area that was forbidden. Let's see. عن أنس بن مالك قال لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. The golden rule: you would not be a believer unless you would love for your Muslim brother what you would love for yourself. Pretty straightforward. Let's see. عن عثمان بن عفان رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه. The best of you, خيركم, the best of you, whoever learns the Quran and teaches it. Ya salam. So the best action, the best perhaps job that you could hold is basically to teach the Quran. Well, what does it mean to teach the Quran? It can mean to include teaching the Quran, meaning you're really teaching the person how to read it, or it can mean to teach the person tafsir, or it can mean to teach the person perhaps the lugha arabiya that relates to the Quran. All of that is basically ta'allam al-Quran wa 'allama. So the best deed that a person can hold, or the best profession that a person can hold, is basically learning the Quran and teaching it to others. Let's look at this other hadith. عن عمر بن الخطاب قال رسول الله رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله يرفع بهذا الكتاب أقواما ويضع به آخرين. إن الله يرفع بهذا الكتاب أقواما ويضع به آخرين. What does it mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is al-kitab? The word al-kitab is actually referring, it's called al-ahdiyah. This isn't talking about any book, but this is actually talking about a specific book, which is the Quran itself. That some people will be elevated through this book, and others will actually be humiliated through this book. That is the Quran. Some, it will be used to support what they had done, because it would give them guidance. And others might actually use the Quran and reinterpret it and create their own narration and actually get deviant through the Quran. Yes, you're going to find others that will probably select certain passages from the Quran, certain verses, misinterpret it, or maybe others might actually tell you, Inna Allah ghafurun rahim. ما اختلفناش. Certainly, we're not going to dispute that. But if you're going to say Inna Allah ghafurun rahim, and you're going to infer, or you're going to consider that this is to prove that I can commit a sin and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still forgive me, then you got a problem. You're taking the words out of context. So you could see some will use the Quran in a way to elevate them, and others will actually use the Quran and it will humiliate or probably misguide them. So, and that's the same thing with ilm, by the way. When you're looking at ilm, you're going to see that some will use ilm in order to expand their khashya, their fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and others will use ilm in order to get more arrogant. And that really differs from one person to another. The person that has a foundation of arrogance and pride, when they get the ilm, they'll basically abuse that to go stronger and farther with their arrogance. But a person that has taqwa, what ilm will do is that let them know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. As much as you thought that you had known, beyond every scholar, there's the alim, there's the Lord Almighty who gets the ilm, and there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is the one, that is the magnificent one that you need to really take in taqwa, in fear, and that not because you might have the ilm, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would have the right to abuse or even use ilm. It might be used against you, that you had known such information, but you didn't apply it. Then that is something that you would worry about. And of course, يرفع بهذا الكتاب أقواما ويضع به آخرين. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Let's see. عن أبي موسى الأشعري عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: تعاهدوا القرآن فوالذي نفسي بيده لهو أشد تفصيا من الإبل في عقولها. What does that hadith? Recite the Quran regularly, for by the one whose hand is in my soul, whose hand is my soul. No, that's not what it means. Whose soul is in his hand. That's what it means. It is more likely to slip away than camels from their hubbles. So what does that mean? So the Prophet ﷺ is basically saying, ta'ahadul Quran. What does it mean to hold on to the Quran? It can mean in recitation, it can mean also in practice, and it could also mean in knowing the details of the Quran, whether we're learning tafsir or whether we're learning how to recite it, etc. That's ta'ahadul Quran. And same thing when we're speaking about holding it into practice. فوالذي نفسي بيده لهو أشد تفصيا من الإبل في عقولها. It will slip. You know some piece in the Quran, but then it is easy to forget whatever you had memorized, easy to forget whatever you had learned, and it becomes like, oh, I forgot about this ayah. There are 6,236 ayat, but at one point you could all of a sudden forget what this ayah was saying, which could actually be fitting exactly like a mitten on your palm, but you would just at that moment it would just slip your mind. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ was giving us, I guess, the simile and telling us that you see how ibil and camels, whenever you would tie anything around them, and that's why they would tie the camel's hoof. I don't know if it's called the hoof, but they would tie the camel's hoof, and instead of tying their necks, because they could easily just take out or untie or easily just get loose, so they would basically just manage to run away. So right there, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, well, just like you were to tie a camel around its neck, they could easily just slip it out. And that's the same thing. If you were to probably hold on to the Quran, you would see that you could easily forget the ayat that you had memorized. So in order to not forget those ayat, you want to do a daily repetition. You want to hear it regularly. You want to repeat it. You want to do what is considered al-wird. Let's see, well, what does the wird look like? عن عبد الله بن عمرو رضي الله عنهما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: اقرأ القرآن في شهر. قلت إني أجد قوة، حتى قال: فاقرأه في 7 ولا تزد على ذلك. He said, read the Quran, in other words, the whole Quran, make kind of like a regimen to read all of the Quran and complete it in 1 month. So this Sahabi said, well, I have the potential to do even more. So he said, well, read it in 7 days, but don't read it. In other words, don't reduce the number of days, because you want to take the time to absorb the Quran and to absorb what you're reading, and you don't want to just skim through it. Let's see this one. So the regimen, basically, that you want to at least read the Quran in 1 month and complete it in 1 month. And you could see this hadith is authentic. Let's see. عن عبد الله بن عمرو رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: لا حسد إلا في 2. Go ahead, my dear Layla.
Can you teach the Quran if you don't have an ijazah, or you have to have an ijazah to teach
You don't
Quran?
have to have an ijazah, but you want to remember that don't teach something if you don't know it. If you don't know something, just let others know that you don't have an ijazah in this and that you are teaching what you know. So if you're teaching what you know, that's actually part of what you should be teaching. Okay, so even if, let's say, you only know this amount, you only know, for example, let's say Juzu Amma, teach Juzu Amma. If you know how to read, then teach them how to read. Even if you probably don't have the best makharij, well, that's what I know how to do. The best makhraj, this is what I know. I don't have an ijazah, but here's what I know, and here's what I would like to teach. And it would be good to also work further in probably expanding your ijazah, expanding probably your ilm to help you, inshallah, grow in your capacity and not just grow in other people's capacities. So you certainly can. You don't have to have an ijazah unless you are then perhaps teaching it to others as if you have an ijazah. Then in that situation, there's a problem. If you're teaching it to others when you don't have an ijazah and you're teaching them wrong, then that would be haram. Okay? If you're teaching them wrong, then that would be haram, and this is problematic because you're actually then misleading others. So you want to be careful. And let's continue right there. عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا حسد إلا في اثنتين، رجل آتاه الله القرآن فهو يقوم به آناء الليل وآناء النهار، ورجل آتاه الله مالا فهو ينفقه آناء الليل وآناء النهار. He said, there's no envy except in two things. رجل آتاه الله القرآن, a man that was given the ilm of al-Quran, the ability to read al-Quran, and they would, throughout the night, they would recite the Quran and throughout the day. And another man who was given lots and abundant amount of money, and they would spend it throughout the night and throughout the day. But wait a minute, I thought we're not supposed to envy. How come it's saying that we can envy right there? I thought envying someone is evil. There are two kinds of envy. There is the kind of evil envy, which basically means you are wanting whatever privilege or whatever good thing you're seeing, you want it to yourself, and therefore you want it to be taken from the other person. That is evil envy. That's haram. But this is positive envy where, no, I want that person to still have the ilm, to still have the money, but I wish I had the same. That's positive envy. So I wish I had the ilm of al-Quran, I wish I had the ijazas, I wish I had the money to spend, I wish I had this. So in that situation, to make this wish, to be hopeful, to dream that you had this ilm al-Quran, I would have read throughout the night and throughout the day, and I would have made a long qiyam al-layl if only I had read the Quran. Note, if you want to read the Quran, even if you didn't memorize it, but you want to read directly from an iPad or directly from a Quran copy, you could do that. And even in a farida, So you can hold the Quran, whether reading it on your phone or on iPad, but you're not going to read the translation. You're going to be reading the Quran itself. It is a considerable opinion. Just a note, differences of opinions between scholars. The preponderant, wallahu a'lam, you can read directly through the Quran and make qiyam al-layl. Perhaps maybe you wanted to read, I don't know, finish the Quran in a month, probably during qiyam al-layl, but you didn't know how to do that. So you were like, I'm going to get a big Quran right there, and I'm going to basically read it and read while looking. That's permissible. رَجُلٌ أَتَاهُ اللَّهُ مَالًا, and a person that has money. So you got, you don't have this type of money, and you wished you had enough money to donate for Gems of Light, or build an orphanage, or probably build a big masjid, or probably build an Islamic school. You wished I had the money. Just for that, guess what? Even if you didn't have the money, but you just had the dream, you would actually get the same reward. Ain't that cool? All right, let's continue. عن أبي هريرة
That's one of my favorite hadith.
I know. It's like I don't actually have it, but
MashaAllah.
I can dream, right?
Alhamdulillah.
عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تجعلوا بيوتكم مقابر إن الشيطان ينفر من البيت الذي تقرأ فيه سورة البقرة. لا تجعلوا بيوتكم. Don't make your homes as graves. For Shaitan, the devil, would run away from the homes that Surah Al-Baqarah is recited in. And this is something that you would actually see in doing ruqya. Certain ayat al-ruqya, certainly ayat al-ruqya, number one are basically قل هو الله أحد قل أعوذ برب الفلق قل أعوذ برب الناس 3 times, and read it while you're holding your palm like you're going to be washing your face 3 times, then blow 3 times, wipe over your body. 7 times al-Fatiha, 7 times Ayat al-Kursi. Those are good ruqyas, and certainly you could see a whole ruqya for the whole home is also Surah al-Baqarah. So for 3 days, in another narration, in another hadith, that Shaitan will not enter a home if Surah Al-Baqarah is recited in it. So you would see Surah Al-Baqarah would basically be a protector. Same thing we're talking about even physically. Surah Al-Safat, at least the first, give or take, almost 20 ayat. Surah Al-Safat, Surah Al-Ahqaf, the last page in Surah Al-Ahqaf. So certain ayat and certain ayat. We're going to get to certain ayat, which ones you would really need to read. Let's see. Here we go. Here's another one.
I have a question, please.
Go ahead, dear.
Yes. Can you put on a recording of Surah Al-Baqarah in a home? Will that have the same?
You can put a recording, but you want to make sure that you're focused on the recording. All right?
Okay.
Yeah. And certainly there's a bigger barakah when it's you reading. So, because some scholars actually explain that the barakah itself comes with the breath that is reading the Quran. Can you see that? The breath that's reading the Quran. So even when you're doing ruqya, one of the things, of course, do I have any logical explanation on how this works? On how this works, we don't actually have a scientific/logical explanation, but we do see that the ahadith support that there is some kind of a barakah, which really I don't have an MRI scan. I don't have any instruments to scan what a barakah looks like, but we would just recognize that there's so much that we don't know in this world, and that's why a believer would hold on to certain ayat and certain hadith to tell us of what we don't know in this world. Shayateen, we don't really know much about them. Jinn, we have really limited information to understand how shayateen and how jinn work. But we do know that there are ahadith that tell us that they can harm us. And it's really interesting that you would look at different hadith and telling us to do certain dhikr because certain times in certain areas they have a higher probability of shayateen harming us. So we're looking, are we talking about a negative energy here? Well, we're not talking about negative energy, but we're talking about negative shayateen. We're talking about jinn. We're talking about creatures that you cannot see. So certain times, like when you're about to sleep, when you enter the bathroom, when you perhaps are about to travel, when you're about to be intimate, all those, of course, there are more times, I'm just making the story short, that those times are times of a potential influence. Are we talking about exorcism? Are we talking about harm? What type of harm? The answer is we don't have evidences to really talk about what details and what type of harm, but we just know that the ahadith were indicating in a comprehensive way that there is some kind of harm, and therefore the ahadith were more focused on telling you how to stay protected than telling you what type of harm can happen. This is important. How to stay protected, but what type of harm? It didn't really give us the details of what type of harm, but it gave us the details of how to get protected. That's the most important thing. So finding those times and those dhikrs, those adhkar to protect you in certain places, spaces, certain times of your day-to-day life is extremely important to be protected mentally, spiritually, and even physically. Physically? Well, yeah. What do you mean physically? Like exorcism? Perhaps. Can it happen? There are strong evidences that yes. Can you prove it? I can't prove it to you, but I can tell you that with certain experiences, I don't know how to explain to you what really happens, but I will tell you there are certain things in this world that we cannot necessarily explain through science, meaning the human intellect, because a lot of different things are beyond our ability to experiment, and jinn is not part of those areas that you can experiment because they don't fall under matter. If they don't fall under matter, just understand that we cannot dissect them, we cannot experiment them because they're not even matter. So stay protected. How do I stay protected too from different types of pseudo-jinn, or at least pseudo-devils, or at least, let's look at this one. عن أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من حفظ 10 آيات من أول سورة الكهف عصم من الدجال. Whoever memorizes 10 ayat, 10 verses from the beginning of Surah Al-Kahf, then they would be protected from the influence and from the harm of a Dajjal. What is it? Dajjal is basically Antichrist. So what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm just memorizing it, or does that mean I'm just reading it? It means when you say al-hifz, what is al-hifz? To say memorize or hifz with something actually means that the person is capable of reciting them by heart without looking at an actual script. So that's what it means to memorize. We're talking about the first 10 verses of Surah Al-Kahf. عُصِمَ مِنَ الدَّجَّالِ, you're protected from the Dajjal. But of course, this isn't the only thing. So you can't say, let's just say Dajjal comes out right now. Okay, we cannot say, well, I'm protected, I can go meet the Dajjal. No, this is one of the factors to protect you from a Dajjal, but you still have to work on the other factors and the other, let's call them ways of protection, such as not going into the area where Dajjal is, and two, probably seeking Medina or probably seeking Mecca as a refuge if the Dajjal is out there, and three, making sure that whenever he travels to a place that you're running away from that place. So this is, of course, in along and of course coming along with memorizing Surah Al-Kahf. Let's see. عن معاوية بن أبي سفيان رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول من يرد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. الله عليك. من يرد الله به خيرا. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for him, he gives him the understanding of the religion. Can't beat that. If the best good that you can get, the best privilege that you can get, the best way to get the elevation, the best degree to get is really the ability to understand the religion. Are we talking about يفقهه في الدين to mean the science of fiqh, or to mean understanding the deen? No, it's in understanding the deen in general, whether we're speaking about hadith, whether we're speaking about tafsir, whether we're speaking about fiqh, usul al-fiqh, whatever it is in deen. So that's basically speaking about yufaqihu fi deen. And it's not necessarily exclusive to the science of Islamic jurisprudence. Well, what's the difference between those sciences? So there's the science of Islamic jurisprudence. You're just studying human action and what is halal and what is haram. Okay. But is aqidah also part of yufaqihu fi deen? The answer is yes. So this is a general statement, and that the best thing that if you were to get, which is understanding the deen, that basically means you got the best privilege, and just keep that one in mind. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله به طريقا إلى الجنة. من سلك طريقا. What is من سلك? من سلك actually means a person that seeks a certain path. What is that path supposed to be, and how do we actually take that path? We take that path by one, taking the steps to get us to a certain destination. Well, what is the destination that we're trying to get to? يلتمس فيه علما. They're trying to seek ilm. They're trying to seek knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of the religion, knowledge to basically distinguish right from wrong, knowledge to learn the details of perhaps what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as basically the path of truth, etc. سهل الله به له به طريقا إلى الجنة. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a path that is easy to him to find to Jannah. Oh, so what does this also mean? So what this means is that you just take the steps, even if you don't get to the destination, just take the step to get ilm, and you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that path easy for you to continue and find. But you have to put in the intention and take one step after another, even if you don't necessarily get to the final destination. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that easy for you. Will make that easy for you.
That goes back to that hadith about the niyyah.
It goes back, absolutely, Noura. Ahsanti. It takes us back to the hadith about the niyyah. At the end, even if you don't become a scholar, and even if you probably don't get the ijazah, just put in the effort. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the steps to Jannah easy for you to get to. So just put in the intention. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make your life easier. This is, just right there. He will make your life easier to get to Jannah. Well, how so? Because you'll be able to, by this ilm, you'll be able to tell the difference between the wrong path and the right path, and you'll be able to see your path in the right direction. You'll be able to distinguish the right direction, the wrong direction, and that's how it will basically make it easier for you to get to Jannah. So seeking ilm is your way to help you find the right path. Because if you don't have ilm, then you're basically going to confuse your paths. You're going to confuse where you're heading, and you're just going to get lost. And certainly by getting lost, you had increased the probability of you going the wrong direction. Let's go for the other hadith. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال اجتنبوا السبع الموبقات. قالوا يا رسول الله وما هن؟ قال الشرك بالله والسحر وقتل النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق وأكل الربا وأكل مال اليتيم والتولي يوم الزحف وقذف المحصنات المؤمنات الغافلات. الله أكبر. The Prophet ﷺ said, avoid the 7 great destructive sins. They said, O Messenger of Allah, what are they? He said, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sorcery or magic, killing a soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden except by, of course, by right. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given certain times where it is permissible to kill that person, probably because that person is probably is a serial killer, etc., then the government would be the one to basically hold that punishment. Consuming usury, consuming the wealth of an orphan, fleeing on the day of the battle, and slandering chaste, believing women who are unaware of what is being said. So we're talking about basically making slanders against women and talking about believing women and committing false statements that she's probably engaging in any obscene behavior and any sexual aberrations and etc., and claiming such things to basically create a false reputation on this woman would basically be amongst the 7 major sins. Now, scholars had differences of opinions on whether the 7 major sins, whether they are exclusive to these things or whether these are the main ones. So what is al-mubiqa? Al-mubiq is actually coming from to mean that it is making you into a great slip. It's making you into a great fall. It's getting you into a great fall. And that's why ashirku billah, that one's known as sihr. So are we talking about sihr? Are we talking about magic, just doing magic? Or are we talking about believing in magic? So engaging in magic, whether doing magic or asking others to do it for you, you're participating in that. And whether we're speaking about magic, which is black magic, or whether we're speaking about, it's more exclusive to that, but whether we're speaking about different ways to engage in manipulation, that would also be considered magic. And قتل النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق, well, that one's clear, killing anybody, usury, and أكل الربا, أكل مال اليتيم, and eating. Of course, when we say consuming an orphan's wealth, we're speaking about taking an orphan's wealth, basically meaning whether you're using forging documents or whether you're literally taking their wealth and abusing that they are vulnerable at that moment, then that would be included within this. التولي يوم الزحف, it's basically when a person is fleeing on the day of the battle. This is not talking about women running for their life, but this is talking about men that are considered as perhaps part of the army, and then once the actual battle happens, this person who is supposed to be part of the army is running away, got scared, then in that situation, that is tawalli yawm az-zahf. Okay, عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال كل مسكر خمر وكل مسكر حرام. Let's take you up there. They said every intoxicant is wine, and every intoxicant is forbidden. Okay, that was pretty clear. So what is an intoxicant anyways? An intoxicant leads to any type of fogness in basically a person having a foggy brain. Let's say a person is right now not having a sober decision making, a person not being able to have a complete clarity of mind. So whether and of course that basically goes in different levels. So there's a difference between, for example, taking certain wines, or maybe because the longer they fermented, the faster they would, and the more potent, the potency would basically become stronger. And certainly the stronger it is, the more haram and the higher on the scale it would be. So if we're speaking about things like meth, it's definitely, even though it's not a wine, and we know that meth is definitely making people walk like zombies, etc., and very strong, and of course in harming people's minds, and then in that situation it would be even more haram than cocaine. Okay, and then cocaine would definitely be even more haram than probably wine, and wine would probably, depending on the power of it, would definitely vary from one wine to another. At the end, كل مسكر haram. Every single, whether it's a drink or whether it's something that a person can sniff or a person that, or something that one can probably smoke, etc., then whether you're inhaling it, whether you are drinking it, whether you are injecting it, if it leads to intoxication, if it leads to a person losing their mind, then in that situation, it would be haram. I did write a detailed study in regards to not only street drugs, but we're talking about different cannabis, different substances in case that we probably can use for medical purposes. So check it out, inshallah, you'll find it. Okay. عن أبي بكرة رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أكبر الكبائر الإشراك بالله. أكبر الكبائر الإشراك بالله وعقوق الوالدين وشهادة الزور. What is أكبر الكبائر? We're talking about the greatest major sins is number 1, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And 2, عقوق الوالدين, disobeying parents and disrespecting parents. Shahadat az-zur is false witness. So and I want you to connect this one with اجتنب السبع الموبقات because it is related to it. So أكبر الكبائر, we're talking about the major sins. So that's why you want to connect it with this hadith. And that takes us into recognizing that the major sins are not necessarily exclusive to that, okay? Because you can see this particular hadith did not say عقوق الوالدين, but there is another narration that did say عقوق الوالدين, by the way. So we do have a سبع الموبقات having different narrations. There is a narration that even talked about عقوق الوالدين being part of it. Okay, so shirk is clear. We know that piece of it. And what does shirk look like? Shirk can be in believing in other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having the power to do anything, or shirk can be in 2, worshiping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it can be in faith, and it could also be in action or ritual. And 3, it could also be in believing that something else has the power to whether know or harm or bring good or whatever it is. In other words, you study the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if anybody believes that anyone shares such powers that are mentioned in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would be considered shirk. The second category of shirk is, which is ritual. If the person worshipped other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does it mean to worship? Worship is more comprehensive than ritual. That's one side of it. So when we're speaking about ritual, that's one type.
Is that what you mean, like the major and the minor, or is that totally different?
Let me explain it. So when we're speaking about shirk, there's the shirk in where the person is doing shirk in al-ibadah, ritual, where the person is bowing down to a cross. Okay, that's shirk. Okay, the other shirk is if you were to, because it's more comprehensive, because remember, ibadah is not only in ritual, ibadah is also in obedience. So when we're talking about legislation, for a person to say, hey, we actually want to change the rule and we want to make alcohol legal. Okay, we want to make alcohol legal. Then in that situation, the person wanted to take their own desire above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principle. That's a form of shirk. It's different than doing the sin. Okay, doing the sin is one thing, but legislating other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had legislated, that's shirk. Legislating. So if a person were to say, yeah, you know, in order for you to be a really good believer, you have to avoid eating meat. Why? Because it's so cruel to eat meat. Then that's actually right there.
Oh yeah, I've heard that before. Some people.
Right? You saying that this is cruel, you are basically saying that what Islam had permitted in eating aside, or probably the hunted animals, or probably eating certain animals and considering it as cruel, that actually is a form of shirk, because in kufr.
Kufr, yeah, I was just gonna say that.
It's kufr because you had actually put yourself as having the definition of ethics before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered it as ethical to eat this meat, that it's permissible, that it is ethical, then therefore you cannot have your opinion considered as beyond or before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's opinion, ruling and decree. Let's see. عقوق الوالدين. عقوق الوالدين, what does عقوق الوالدين look like? عقوق الوالدين, whether we're speaking about disobeying parents or whether we're speaking about disrespecting the parents. Well, what is the parameter of disrespect? How far can it go to disrespect the parents? Culture plays an important role here because in certain cultures, and you have to embrace that. Is it based on your culture or your parents' culture? It's going to be based on your parents' culture. So if your parent dislikes such a behavior to insist on doing it, then that would be a form of عقوق الوالدين. That would be a form of عقوق الوالدين. Why? Because what is the word عقوق? What does it mean? العق actually means to put down. العق means to let go. العق actually means to deny the gratitude. العق actually means to disrespect. So any form of disrespect, whether they give you an order or whether they give you a certain, I guess, a certain policy that they probably had done at home, as long as it doesn't contradict Islam. If it contradicts Islam, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was really straightforward. وَإِنْ جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَى أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. If they ordered you to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then don't obey them in that regards. But you disobeying them, it doesn't mean that that gives you the permission to disrespect them. And that's why the ayah emphasized and said, صَاحِبُهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. What is a suhbah? صَاحِبُهُمَا actually means to be a friend, to accompany, to be a companion to them, ma'rufa, on good terms, in good ways. صاحبهما في الدنيا معروفة. شهادة الزور. What is شهادة الزور? شهادة الزور is basically making false witnesses. Let's look at this hadith. False witness. How do you make a false witness? Whether you would literally say, give false information, or whether you're forging documents, that's a false witness. عن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من مات وهو يدعو من دون الله ندا دخل النار نسأل الله العفو والعافية. He said, whoever dies while calling upon someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a rival will enter hellfire. So that goes in, the whole idea of shirk. If a person basically, the end of their life, they basically died doing shirk, then that's going to guarantee hellfire. من مات لا يشرك بالله شيئا دخل الجنة. So this one's basically looking at it from one angle. What if parents were two different cultures? Fair enough. So if the parents were two different cultures, then you're going to deal with your father based on his culture, and you're going to deal with your mother based on her culture. So how do I know? Well, you're going to look at their facial expression. You're going to look at their words. If they tell you, I don't like that, if she tells you, I don't like that, well, you're going to have to respect what she likes and what she doesn't like. So you're looking at the parameter. The parameter is what she may vocalize or what her behavior, or what, of course, her expression is showing, whether she's distressed and does not like what you're doing, or whether he is okay with it. So your father might be okay with saying jokes, but your mother can think your jokes are too silly and that they're annoying. Well, say the jokes to your dad, but not to your mom. There's something really interesting. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, whenever he would be with his mother, he would just stay quiet. Muhammad ibn Sirin, it was mentioned that whenever he was around his mother, he would just say all these funny jokes. And the scholars explained that Muhammad ibn Sirin's mom, she just loved entertainment and engagement and just loved her son entertaining her in jokes. And versus Ahmad ibn Hanbal, it seems like his mother was very introverted, does not necessarily like jokes. He expected him to just stay quiet. So that's a thing. So it isn't necessarily a general rule. Should I say jokes to my parents or not, for example? Should I put food for them? Should I clean? Should I do this? We would say your mother probably has, let's say, certain things that make her happy, and your father might have certain things that make him happy. So you're going to see what makes your mother happy and pleased, and you're going to do that. And you're going to see what makes your father happy, and you're going to basically do that. And what makes them angry, you're going to stop that. And even though, but let's just say, they got angry, but I didn't do anything wrong. It can happen. It's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I just probably just given them a kiss or probably hugged them, but my mom doesn't like getting hugged, for example. So if she doesn't like that, if that's annoying to her, then you just have to consider that, oh, well, she just doesn't like hugs, for example. Okay. But maybe she likes getting her hand kissed, who knows, or maybe her forehead, or maybe she, I don't know, likes a good chocolate or whatever it is. I don't know what she would like. My mom, as long as you wash her dishes, that's what makes my mom happy. This is real. My mom, if you wash the dishes, that's it. You have just made her day. You clean the house, you just made her day. To my mom, as long as you're getting up and moving and working around the house, that's what gets her happy. Hugs and kisses, then that's cheap love to her. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can tell me in the chat what makes your mom happy. I'd be happy to hear that and know what makes your mom happy. Okay, let's see what makes everybody's mom happy. Okay, let's see. عن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لعن الله من ذبح لغير الله ولعن الله من لعن والديه ولعن الله من آوى محدثا ولعن الله من غير منار الأرض. Let's see. And let's see right there that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or let's see, لعن Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, what number is this? 29. Okay, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed whoever slaughters for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed whoever curses his parents. Of course, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses whoever curses his parents, think of probably maybe swearing at their parents. That's also cursed. Or probably when you're talking about la'ana waliday, a person cursing their parent, it doesn't necessarily mean a person cursing only to say, you're cursed or damn you or etc. It doesn't have to be damning, but to curse can also mean to use any derogatory words. Things like any derogatory statements to disrespect the parent is a form of cursing. Any form of disrespect. Maybe you're telling your parent, you're so not fair, you're so mean. This is basically a form of cursing the parents. Then that person that does that would basically be cursed. Or let's say the person is telling their parent, you're so foolish, you're so silly, you're so stupid, etc. That's cursing the parents. It's so sad that we're seeing this often and think of it as the child expressing his feelings or expressing how probably he's disliking or she's disliking something. That's form of cursing the parents. So it doesn't have to be to curse, to say damn, but it could be to use any form of a derogatory statement on the parents. من لعن الله من ذبح لغير الله. This slaughter to slaughter for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this one's pretty clear. لعن الله من آوى محدثا. Basically, this is extremely important for those that would think that what is al-muhdith? Al-muhdith is a person who basically an innovator. Is it an innovator or is it a Wait a minute, a sinner? So yes, you know a person is committing sin, but then you are giving them shelter, you're giving them all the different things. In other words, you're approving their actions. You're approving their actions. You're approving, you're giving them support. Whether it's a person committing sin or whether it's an innovator, there are certain things that you have to show that, sorry, I'm not going to support what you're doing. I'm not going to invite you in. I'm not going to be a person that is going to be engaging with you and so forth. لعن الله من غير منار الأرض. غير منار الأرض, whether we're speaking about changing, whether we're speaking about al-Qibla or whether we're speaking about, of course, the borders of certain lands. You know that this is your land, but then this person wanted to manipulate, let's say, the land and manipulate the landowner. So they basically expanded their area and changed the borders. Why? Because they wanted to get more land, so they started somehow changing the borders in order to get into someone else's borders. So that would be غير منار الأرض. عن جابر رضي الله قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن بين الرجل وبين الشرك والكفر ترك الصلاة. That the main fine line between a person and between associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. shirk and kufr, is leaving salah. Scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether this is literally to be understood, that if a person does not pray, and of course, whether they are avoiding or they're not praying out of laziness, or whether they don't believe in prayer, whether that's what gets them into kufr, or whether this is saying that a person that does not pray is like on the borderlines of kufr and shirk. And of course, scholars had a huge debate between such interpretations. So I'll just make the story short and just mention that one at least. Just mention the differences of opinions. Okay. عن بريدة بن الحصيب رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من ترك صلاة العصر حبط عمله. Whoever leaves صلاة العصر حبط عمله. What does حبط عمله means? حبط عمله actually means that their deeds will be in vain. Whoever leaves صلاة العصر. So why صلاة العصر? صلاة العصر is mentioned in the Quran to be الصلاة الوسطى. What is the Salat al-Wusta? It's the Salah in midday, and that's Salat al-Asr. Why? Because usually Salat al-Asr is usually the time when we're probably just wanting to rest. Salat al-Asr is probably the time that we just
Can you guys hear her?
You can't hear me, Noura?
Oh, now we can.
Huh.
We couldn't for
I-
like a minute.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm still here. So Salat al-Asr would be Salat al-Wusta as well. It's because usually people are quiet at that time, resting at that time after a long day of work. So it becomes, I guess, I guess it's a moment when we're feeling intimidated to just rest and not pray. So من ترك صلاة العصر حبط عمله. Whoever leaves صلاة العصر, then their actions are in vain. عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الذي تفوته صلاة العصر كأنما وتر أهله وماله. Whoever leaves صلاة العصر, which is basically afternoon prayer, is as if his family and wealth have been lost. The word wutira, as if he had lost his family and all his wealth. In other words, Salat al-Asr would be more valuable to do and to keep than all your family and all your wealth. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الصلوات الخمس والجمعة إلى الجمعة ورمضان إلى رمضان مكفرات ما بينهن إذا اجتنبت الكبائر. You could see a lot of ahadith like that, where the Prophet ﷺ said the 5 daily prayers, so from one prayer to another, and the Friday prayer to the other Friday prayer, and from this Ramadan till the following Ramadan, they're basically to be sin removers / expiations for what was committed between them. And of course, إذا اجتنبت الكبائر, if we're talking about avoiding the major sins. So the major sins would not be included within this expiation that, of course, we're talking about certain times. So whatever you would practice between a Friday and a Friday, a prayer and a prayer, Ramadan and Ramadan, the different, let's call them smaller, minor sins, those would be forgiven to you if you are committed to such practices, whether it's fasting Ramadan to the other fasting Ramadan, or whether it is Friday prayers, etc. Unless we're speaking about major sins, then that would not be included. So what are the major sins? We just mentioned them before. We talked about shirku billah, we talked about al-qatl, we talked about magic, we talked about uquq al-walidain, we talked about shahadat al-zur, usury, we talked about shahadat al-zur, forging witnesses, we talked about قذف المحصنات, we talked about all of those. عن عبد بن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة. What is الظلم? الظلم ظلمات. On Judgment Day, injustice is darkness. Well, it's actually not an accurate translation. This one's not very accurate. الظلم ظلمات. Dhulumat actually means a stage of darkness, and this is a metaphor, meaning that it's going to be darkness, meaning different punishments. Okay, so if a person is to oppress anyone, then they're going to get stages of punishments in order to give whoever was abused or whoever was oppressed, to give them their rights, basically. Also on Judgment Day, you could see whether we're talking about good deeds transforming into something else, and bad deeds also transforming into something else, and that's going to determine the amount of punishment or the amount of probably elevation in Jannah. Okay, so al-dhulm. What type of dhulm are we talking about? Whether we're speaking about dhulm such as uquq al-walidain, or whether we're speaking about dhulm for the orphans, or whether we're speaking about dhulm for vulnerable people, children, etc., or even dhulm, even if it's perhaps abusing a cat or abusing a dog or whatever it is, that's form of dhulm. Or whether it's taking somebody's rights, whether we're speaking about their life, whether we're speaking about their mental health, you're abusing them mentally, or probably you're abusing them physically, or abusing them probably with their arad, with their of course reputation, or you're probably abusing them by taking their property, etc. That's a form of dhulm. That's all a form of dhulm, so you really have to be careful. When it comes to dhulm, the person himself has the right to, on Judgment Day, either forgive you or not. So when we're looking at a dhulm, we're speaking about on Judgment Day, you have to seek the person himself to decide and determine whether they want to forgive you or not. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من ظلم قيد شبر من الأرض طوق الله من 7 أرضين. And what does that mean? Whoever unjustly takes a handspan of land will have it hung around his neck on the day of resurrection. So we're speaking about, at the time, or at least even during our times, but it's basically when we're speaking about a person buying a certain land, but then they, of course, forged or lied about probably a certain amount of probably land or a certain border. Then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically surround around their neck 7 ardeen, like around a span of 7 lands or 7 earths. And then therefore they'll be held accountable. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال كل المسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه. كل المسلم على المسلم حرام. Every single Muslim to another Muslim, they basically have certain restrictions that you need to consider, that it is to be respected. It is to be honored. 1, their blood, i.e., which is a metaphor to mean their life, their wealth, and even al-ird. What is al-ird? Is reputation and their family. All of those are to be honored and therefore to be respected, and you cannot transgress the limit even if you had the power to do so, because at the end they are restricted to be given rights by the Lord himself, and therefore not because you have the ability to probably transgress the limit, it doesn't necessarily mean that gives you the right to do so. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أتدرون ما الغيبة؟ قالوا يا رسول الله، قالوا الله ورسوله أعلم. قال ذكرك أخاك بما يكره. قيل أرأيت إن كان في أخي ما أقول؟ قال إن كان فيه ما تقول فقد اغتبته، وإن لم يكن فيه ما تقول فقد بهته. Let's say that the Sahaba had said, أتدرون, the Prophet ﷺ said, do you know what backbiting and what gossip is? And they said, well, it's Allah and his messenger know best. And he said, mentioning your brother in a way that he dislikes. In other words, something that, well, he doesn't like that you talk about him and behind his back or her back in such a way, then that's enough. And they said, well, what if that really was about that person? He's really cheap. We didn't say anything that wasn't true. This person is really cheap. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if he really was as you had described, then that's exactly what ghaiba is. Ghaiba is to actually say, even if it's the right thing, if he doesn't like that being said about him, then in that situation, you had certainly committed that backbiting, which definitely is haram. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ فِيهِ مَا تَقُولُ فَقَدْ بَهَتَّهُ. If it wasn't true and that person wasn't as you had described him, then فَقَدْ بَهَتَّهُ. Then you had created some kind of a slander, a false slander, and then in that situation, you would be held accountable. And this is a form of اللغو. What is اللغو? اللغو, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes al-mu'mineen وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described the believers, he described them as عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ, that they would abstain from laghu. What is laghu? Laghu, whether it's speaking in shirk, or whether it's speaking in slander, or whether it's speaking in qadhf, or whether it's speaking in speaking about other people, whether it's true or not true. If they don't like that you say that about them, then don't say it, and respect their spaces. So Islam regards that a person's space goes farther than the space that they occupy physically. A person's space goes farther. Your space reaches to whenever you are talked about, that's your space. Don't talk about that person, even if they're not present. If they don't like that being said about them, then that becomes their space. Their reputation is their space. Their property is their space. Their body is their space. Their mental health is their space. So therefore, دمه وماله وعرضه. You got to respect it. عن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أول ما يقضى بين الناس يوم القيامة في الدماء. The Prophet ﷺ said, the first thing on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will rule between people will be blood. So what does that mean? Well, there's going to be blood and we're going to, no. What that means, it's a metaphor to mean people's lives. Who killed who? You killed someone? Well, then in that situation, you're going to be the first one. You're going to come forward, and that's the first thing. When you say the first thing, that tells you the gravity and how severe it is. That this is so severe that that's the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to consider, that first things first. We're going to discuss who was killed in a way that was oppressive. We're going to discuss that first. Okay. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من حمل علينا السلاح فليس منا ومن غشنا فليس منا. من حمل علينا السلاح, whoever carries arms or basically weapons against us is not one of us, meaning they're not part of the Muslim Ummah. And whoever deceives us is not one of us. Wait a minute.
Is this, so you know how you're not supposed to like hold a knife towards somebody or something like that? Is that based on this hadith?
This is including it. This is including it. من حمل علينا السلاح. In fact, there is I don't know if it's going to be mentioned here, but there is another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, سباب المسلم فسوق وقتاله كفر. What is سباب المسلم فسوق? It is part of fisq if a person name calls another Muslim. So سباب المسلم فسوق وقتاله كفر. What is القتال? قتال doesn't necessarily mean to literally kill. القتال could also mean to fight, whether it's fist fighting, I don't know, you're beating up a person, you're holding a weapon, that would basically be included within that. من حمل علينا السلاح فليس منا. So when you're looking at, going back to that hadith, سباب المسلم فسوق. So if a person were to use any form of swearing at another Muslim, then that's سباب المسلم فسوق. Then that's being a fasiq. قتاله كفر. And if you were to fight the Muslims, to kill the Muslims, then that's a form of kufr. Is it literally kufr, or is it telling you that it's at the bridge and basically at the level of a person being kafir because they're right now creating what might actually be against the ummah? And therefore, going with this hadith, من حمل علينا السلاح فليس منا. Whoever carries any arms against us, then they're not part of us. Meaning they're not part of the ummah. ومن غشنا فليس منا. And whoever cheats on us, basically right there, deceives, cheats. Well, what does it mean to deceive or cheat? So when we're speaking about deceiving or cheating, we're actually talking about whether in transactions or whether in marriage or whether in documents, whatever it is, in any form or shape. It doesn't have to be exclusive to business. Because at the end, if you know that you had made a certain relationship with another person, there's a certain agreement, there's a certain principle, then we agreed on something, you cannot cheat in that regards. عن ثابت بن الضحاك رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لعن المؤمن كقتله. لعن المؤمن كقتله. Okay, now that one's a tongue twister. or a thought twister, I should say. لعن المؤمن. What does لعن المؤمن? اللعن is damning. What is اللعن? اللعن is damning. اللعن is also asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to exclude them from being included in his mercy. That's اللعن. And it's definitely something that a Muslim should be avoiding. Why? Because if that person is not deserving that curse / damning, then in that situation, it will actually come back to you. But this isn't an easy word. You have to take it seriously. So if you were to curse a believer, it would be in its gravity as if you had killed him. So we're speaking about the gravity, we're speaking about how the severity of such a behavior that you would really watch your tongue and what you're saying. You want to be careful in how you describe people, how you would say those words. So not because you're angry doesn't give you the right to somehow start using words to probably defame others or probably harm others with your words. You got to be really careful with that. Let's see. إياكم والظن. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إياكم والظن فإن الظن أكذب الحديث ولا تحسسوا ولا تجسسوا ولا تنافسوا ولا تحاسدوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. It's a lot, right? Let's look at this. Beware of suspicion or doubt. For suspicion is the falsest of speech. Do not look for faults in others. Do not spy. Do not compete with one another. Do not envy one another. Do not hate one another. Do not turn your backs on one another, and be, O servants of God, brothers. So what does it mean? Do not look for the faults in others. That's التحسس is you're trying to, whether in their speech or whether trace them, maybe you're trying to look over their social media to see. We're not here talking about probably seeing because of marriage. Maybe you're trying to investigate who this person is. That's a different story. Okay. But we're talking about someone, probably a classmate. It would be haram for you, upon you to basically go maybe hack their social media account or whatever it is, and trying to somehow trace their social media or trace their sins to see what kind of a person it is in order to spy at them, etc. Then that's tahassasu. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. Same thing with spying. But this is more particular than التجسس, because التجسس is that it's a form where certainly this person probably kept some information confidential, but then you manage to get that information. التحسس is that some of that information is not necessarily that information is not public information. ولا تحسسوا. Oh, what happened here? Is it muted now? ولا
No,
تجسسوا.
we can hear you.
Okay. ولا تنافسوا. تنافسوا. What is it, تنافس? So does that mean we're not supposed to be competing with one another? No, when we're speaking about التنافس, we're speaking about in areas, because there is an ayah وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. We're talking about in this hadith. This is not included in what the ayah is talking about, because when the ayah was talking about وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ, to compete with one another on good things, that's actually part of good. But if we're competing tanafus, let's say we're trying to rent a house. And I heard that such property was available, so I go and I put my bid. But then someone else I know found another property, and I basically heard that, hey, that person basically put that bid on the other house. So I basically put another bid to just basically get into somehow get into their area. In other words, this person is saying, hey, I'm buying it for, let's say, 200,000. And I know that this person there's already, in the process, making a contract. So I would come in and tell the owner, hey, I'll give you 250,000. But you already know that there was an agreement already at stake right there. So why did you come in to probably come in to probably bid for 250,000? But you already know that there was something going there. So that's التنافس المحرم. This competition would be the competition that is not permissible. Okay, you want to do Q&A right now, Noura? So you want me to stop at 41 and we'll continue, inshallah. We'll continue with these hadith next Monday.
On Sunday, right? You're Monday.
I'll be happy to continue tomorrow, to be honest, too.
Oh, okay. I mean, what do you guys think?
Oh, wait a minute. I've got a test to take. I know right now I'm back to getting my education.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, exactly. I like the way you said MashaAllah, Noura.
No, I mean you've joined the club of students now.
Club of students, exactly. It kind of feels weird, Noura, when you had been teaching for almost 20 years, all of a sudden becoming a student. It kind of feels like you're in the wrong place. I know that's so arrogant to say, but it kind of feels like you're in the wrong place.
Alhamdulillah.
I don't know how to explain it. I'm not trying to speak it, say it from an arrogant way, but it just feels like, okay, I was always talking, and right now I'm the one that's listening. So I got to really teach myself how to listen now and not necessarily just speak. So yeah, it takes me, I guess, in a different angle. I have to listen more now. So I'm ready to listen, Noura. Hit it.
Oh, should we like pause?
Yeah, you got questions? Yeah, I'd be happy to answer them. And inshallah, with these 200 hadith, they're pretty good. I mean, you could see it's a very good.
Yeah, mashallah, and it's like different subjects too.
Different subjects. I love them, and really short, different subjects. And we've got 200, so we're gonna, inshallah, we're gonna finish all these hadith, and you're going to be a scholar.
Alhamdulillah.
Right. If there are questions, my friends, I'm ready to listen.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Sister Samira, how are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, Sheikh Aisha. I'm well, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Very good. Alhamdulillah. I'd love to hear your comment or even question. I'd love to hear it.
I will ask what I need to ask, but right now I'm just curious to know what you are studying. MashaAllah, you know so much already. I'm just curious to know what it is that you're studying now.
What I'm studying right now, I'm getting a second PhD.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, I'm getting a second PhD. I didn't really want to do that, to be honest, but because of visa requirements. So our option was to go as students. So yeah, my husband's getting his 5th PhD and I'll be getting my second, inshallah, working on it. So yeah.
MashaAllah. Okay.
Also in the field of Islamic studies, definitely I'm not studying physics.
Yeah. So more benefit for us,
That's
inshallah.
a good one.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or biology. Imagine that. Yeah. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. And then I had a question with regards to our lesson today. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. I always wonder, and with people who had experience in this, and what if a wife suspects a husband of cheating? Then is she allowed to look into his phone?
That's a good question. I would definitely say no, unless things pop up right there, and subhanallah, الكذب in Arabic we say حبل قصير. If a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the person some time. And if the person is consistent with their sin, wallahi, it will go up onto the surface. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يمهل ولا يهمل. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the time, but then things will go on the surface and He will not let go. It's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting go, but if things go onto the surface, then in that situation, this person had been transgressing the limit for a long time. So are we allowed to go and start searching on the phone? I'll tell you one thing. Once we start becoming suspicious of one another and the relationship, especially a husband and wife relationship, once we start losing trust in one another and we're starting to search in each other's phones, then we had broken a major trust, a major a bridge between us. And of course, when you're going to start searching the phone, just the idea of searching the phone is actually coming in not only suspicion, but it's coming in with a lot of su'ul dhan. You're coming in with an ill intention, and you're coming in certainly with a package that you are ready to interpret anything that you may find to basically support your suspicion. So do not search, do not do that tajassus. And at the end, unless there was something extremely major, we're speaking about perhaps a person that is an oppressor, etc., then in that situation, you will have a different case by case. So I would say consult your local alim to see whether that case includes you or not.
Jazakallah khair. One more question. This has nothing to do with the class, but I had asked on the chat and it wasn't answered, and it's pressing. When we are in the Harmain, and one wants to Masjid Nabawi, and one wants to go for salam, and they are menstruating, can they do so?
So they're menstruating. They're menstruating, and they're doing ihram, you mean?
No, they're in the Masjid Nabawi and they want to go to the Rawza Mubarak and to just go do salam.
So in order
there.
to go for a Rawda, you're going to have to pass by the masjid, okay?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Rawda is like at the end of the masjid. So anyhow, there are differences of opinions between scholars whether a woman that is menstruating, whether she can enter the masjid or not. Okay, so just a note on that. Wallahu a'lam, she can enter the masjid. Of course, if she is guaranteeing that she would not contaminate the masjid. So yes, it is permissible. Wallahu a'lam.
And one should go by briefly and not sit there and make dua, or you could do
Right.
that too.
Yes, you can basically make the dua there, and especially that most people are going there and it's only once in a lifetime or maybe two in a lifetime. It's not like you've got the opportunity every day. So this opinion that she can enter the masjid, even if she has her period, actually comes at, I guess, handy because of those circumstances too.
Right. Jazakallah khairan.
وإياكم. Any other questions, dear?
There's one in the chat.
Read it, Noura.
Oh, it says, why is cursing related to eyebrows in these hadith? Cursing is injustice. It is because they were historically associated with prostitution, and the intention was to discourage imitation in Islam.
So I'm actually confused myself if this is a question or if this is a statement, but I'll assume both. So number one is that when it comes to eyebrows, or let's look at the word nums. The word nums in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ النَّامِصَ وَالْمُتَنَمِّصَ. The word or the hadith generally says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed an-namisa, the women that do nums, the women that do it to others, and the women that have it done to them. Now, when we're looking at the word namasa, scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether that means facial hair or whether that means just eyebrow hair. And if we're talking about eyebrow hair, does that mean you're removing the hair and you're putting instead of a tattoo? Or does that mean you're removing the hair or you're shaping the eyebrow? Or how shaping it into what? Are we talking about like making it really thin? Or are we talking about shaping it in any way? What does it really mean? So there are these differences of opinions, and the differences of opinions is really coming based off the differences of opinions between the scholars of Lugha Arabiya. Okay, the scholars in Lugha Arabiya, and it is something within the Arabic language, that the word namasa means to remove facial hair. The word namasa means to shape the eyebrows. The word namasa in Lugha Arabiya is to also mean thinning the eyebrows. And the word namasa is to pluck the eyebrows completely and use pencil tattoo instead of it. So namasa in Lugha Arabiya actually means all of these. Okay. Now, because in Lugha Arabiya that all of these actually means namasa, that's why the scholars had differences of opinions on how we understand this. That takes us to question 2. So, well, why the eyebrows? Well, it wasn't just the eyebrows. You look at the hadith, and the Prophet ﷺ actually had cursed the women that do, I guess, shaping the eyebrows. If we were to say namasa is exclusive to the eyebrows, 2, the ones that would braid their teeth in a certain way. The Japanese culture until now, they actually have the women, or it's part of their culture that they would braid the teeth to be separated to make it seem like they're young. It's part of their culture. That was the Arabic culture as well. The third one, which is tattooing. So there are different explanations to what is the logic behind these practices. Was it because it was the culture of deviant groups, such as prostitution or prostitutes, that's what they used to do? Or was it a change because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned وَلَآمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلْيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quoted that Iblis had said that he would use the method to change you internally by changing the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the changing creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're talking about fillers. Are we talking about Botox? Are we talking about shaping eyebrows? Are we talking about, I don't know, all these different things that they would inject in the body, changing the creation and whatever, puffing and huffing and whatever that is added? All of that is included. All of that is included in here. So when we're speaking about that, this is an indication that changing the appearance is one method that shaitan would use in order to change your fitrah, to change your instinct, to change who you are on the inside. So that's one thing. Number 2, the second interpretation, which is by Tahir ibn Ashur, he basically said that no, it's not necessarily just that. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have said no. Tahir ibn Ashur had a different interpretation. Tahir ibn Ashur said that this is basically a certain practice. Therefore, any practice that is practiced by the deviant group, so let's say a certain dress code, a certain piercing, a certain way of wearing some kind of shoes or some kind of whatever shirt or whatever it is. If this is practiced by deviant groups, then that would be haram to practice as a Muslim man or woman. If there's a certain necklace, if there's a certain practice, then don't be like them. So in that situation, it's not exclusive to the braiding the teeth and the tattooing and the shaping the eyebrows, but it would be more inclusive to any behavior that is to fit in a deviant group. It would be haram and the person would be cursed. And that is a considerable opinion that the scholars had mentioned, because looking at the hadith and looking at the context, Tahir ibn Ashur, he said every single behavior that is a practice, a culture that is practiced by a deviant group, it would be haram for a Muslim man or a woman to be included. But why? Why would it be haram? I'm just trying to look good. What's up with you? Right. So you are trying to look good, but the whole intention is to fit in. If you are feeling a part of that deviant group and you're trying to fit with them, then without you realizing, your behavior is going to change along with that amusement that started affecting your choice and your preferences of what makes you attractive, what makes you fit in, what makes you look good, etc. And you're going to see that it's going to start affecting your behavior as well. So, at the end of the day, is that how you feel about yourself, how you fit in, how you want to display yourself is going to have its impact on what you practice and what your heart embraces. What if the doctor asks you to tell positive and negatives about your spouse during counseling session? Fair enough. So it's important. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he dislikes announcing the evil things, of course, unless the person is oppressed. So if you're oppressed and here you are basically feeling, my husband, let's say, is basically always cursing me with words and it's affecting me mentally, etc. And here it is. I'm not here sharing it with a friend. I'm not here telling, random people he's got this bad habit. He's basically always, cursing me, or he's always, doing something that you dislike, etc. But here I'm in a therapy session. I'm here in a session with a specialist that is to help us fix this. You want to stay as ambiguous as possible, unless it is directly related. So you don't want to just say, okay, now is my chance to get out all the different things that I basically hated about this person. And right now okay, now is my chance. No. You want to be careful. It's not your chance to get everything that you dislike. Okay? If you're capable of using a broad description, if you're capable of concealing that person's sins, then do so. And stick to the matters that are probably a deal breaker because you want to try to fix the marriage. Then probably that, let's say he has some kind of a deal breaker habit, and you were like, well, this is my deal breaker. I'm not going to discuss all the other things. I'm just going to discuss the things that are deal breaker for me, that if they don't get fixed, I'm going to leave this marriage. So let's see these deal breakers. Then you're not going to start laying out all the different things, but I'm just here going to focus on the deal breakers. Okay. But teens need to be careful. Okay, Noura. Okay, I'm confused. With psychologists? Oh, girl, of course. That's a whole thing. I do actually have some videos about the differences between mental health in Islam and the identity crisis and mental health in Islam and the difference with psychology and the Western psychology and psychiatry and all of that. So check it out. I think I have 3 videos in that regards. I worked really hard on those videos, trust me. So inshallah, we will continue tomorrow. No, tomorrow we're having this sister Noura, aren't we? Where is she? Is it? Oh, that's on
going to be
Tuesday.
on
Monday.
the 24th.
Okay, so that's in 3 days from now. Well, tomorrow I have a test, so I just remembered that I cannot do the class tomorrow, but I can do it the day after tomorrow. We'll continue these hadith, inshallah.
Inshallah.
All right, so that would be our pearls. I'm loving those ahadith, and I loved how they made that compilation. I love it. I love it. So stay tuned, everyone.